Imagine if you were able to gather 53 of the world's leading minds when it comes to longevity, anti aging, slowing the biological aging process, or even reversing it. Imagine getting all of those minds into one room where you can ask them questions and figure out the things that they all agree about and where they disagree. Well, that's exactly what we discuss in today's episode because our guest is putting on the Secrets to Longevity Summit, which will take place February 26th through March 3rd. And he interviewed these experts. And in this episode, we discuss some of his takeaways from all of those interviews in a short period of time. We talk about the most important things to focus on. Their top suggestion is not what most people in this field would expect. We talk about the role of routine and diet and sleep and other fundamentals of health. We talk about some of the more advanced biohacking practices, the role of testing and supplementation, and so much more. If you're interested in the subject of longevity and not just living more years, but living more high quality years where you're fully self supported, you're functional, as I call it, functional longevity or health span, then this is going to be a great episode for you. Our guest this week is a repeat guest, Chris Burres. Chris recently appeared on episode 117 of this podcast and previously episode 105. Previously, we talked mostly about a promising longevity molecule that does a lot more than just longevity called C60 and the human grade version of that that's safe for consumption called ESS60. Because Chris is the founder and chief scientist at a company called My Vital C. They manufacture a Nobel Prize winning molecule responsible for the single longest longevity experiment result in history, which was a full 90% extension of life. Granted, it was in an animal model, but they are actually pioneering research around C60 for humans. But that's not the focus of today's conversation. Chris recently published a book called Live Longer and Better, and he is the MC and the host of the Uncovering the Secrets to Longevity Health Summit. I'll drop a link to the Health Summit in the description of this episode where you can check it out and sign up. It's completely free if you watch it live, and a link to everything we discuss you'll find in the show notes for this episode at mindbodypeak.com/145. And if you can't get enough of all things longevity, you want a curated list of the highest impact things that the longevity experts agree on behind closed doors sometimes, I'm putting the final touches on a little mini longevity course. It'll be small and bite-sized and perfect for beginners. And the reason I created this is because I get a lot of questions around longevity and the biohacks and supplements and things that people wonder if they're worth it. And while I'm a fan of a lot of them, for most people, they will get much better results with a tiny fraction of the cost by knowing exactly where to look, because there's only so much time in the day. And with 1,000,001 different health things all vying for our attention, it can be hard to know exactly what to prioritize. So in this mini course, I've simplified it for you, and I provide small mini action items to help you each and every single day without making it a full-time job. And if you master these, you'll be ahead of 99.9% of the population. So check it out. The link will be in the description of this episode. Drop a comment if you have any questions, reach out to me. Happy to help you along your longevity journey. And now, sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation with Chris Burres. Chris, welcome to Mind Body Peak Performance.
Nick, thank you so much for having me back. I'm excited to share stuff I've been learning and maybe learn a little bit about what you've been learning and what you've been doing.
Yeah, so this is the third time you've been on the show. We've talked mostly about a power molecule that is known as C60 previously. There you go. You got it right there in front of you. And today we're going to talk about a little more about C60, of course. And then also I want to dig into some of the projects you've been working on behind the scenes, maybe not so behind the scenes anymore, but a new book and a upcoming longevity summit. So before we dig into both of those, tell me the unusual non-negotiables you've done so far today for your health, your performance, and your bioharmony.
Right away, I know with your audience, I haven't done anything unusual. Maybe I've done things unusual for other people. You may hear that I have some chest congestion. Literally last night, I woke up because there was a wheezing down here. And so I just rolled over because the wheezing went away when I rolled over. Even though I'm in this kind of state, one, I've got the energy to keep performing. I've got the energy, and I think a lot of that comes from my product. But two, I just really the lessons that I learned in this longevity summit, I've really kind of always thought all of that to say, I went for a 22-minute jog this morning at my normal pace, right? So I'm kind of hacking up a little phlegm here and there. I think that's probably unusual. Again, maybe not for your audience, but most people, and frankly, me in the past would have said like, you know what, I'm not feeling that good. I'm just going to sleep. I think sleep is better than the exercise. I got a full 8 hours of sleep last night, other than the wheezing that kept waking me up. I actually had a dessert last night. So I visit my mom. When I visit my mom, we have some ice cream and some cake. And I'm actually feeling a little bloated from that, probably the wheat stuff in the little cake pieces. So I haven't eaten since probably 9 yesterday. I won't eat until 3. So I'm doing about an 18-hour fast. Again, probably your audience is right on board. Like I'm not adding anything new. I can share that I just started to do some peptides. So BPC 157. I've had a kind of tennis elbow situation for a while, and one very specific spot in my knee. So BPC 157 and TB 500. I've really just done two small 300 microgram injections of those. And I'll continue those until I get through 10 milligrams, and just trying to see what might help. Because I've been doing a lot of stretching. I actually been doing some block therapy. I didn't do it today, and it is negotiable because I didn't do it today. But it is a very interesting thing. So that's a long-winded story of what I've done this morning.
Today, I want to focus on some of the things that you've been up to, such as your book, Live Longer and Better. Tell me what that inspired that book and what it's all about.
I've always believed kind of two things. One is that as you're accumulating information, you should share that information with people. And then there's the more selfish aspect of it, which is when you're sharing that information with people, you're actually cementing that information in your own head. And so that was really kind of the genesis of the book. As I was going into pandemic, I thought, okay, I want to write a book, and I'm not a writer. Like I don't write that many articles. I don't write. And so I was like, I need a co-author. Didn't know where I was going to find one. I actually reached out to the co-author for Lifespan, right? So David Sinclair's co-author, his name is Matt LaPlante. I think it's Matt LaPlante or LaPlante, but I think it's LaPlante. Reached out to him. He was too busy, and frankly, might have been out of my budget, right, to work with. But that was my thought process is, hey, I've got all these ideas. I've got this story. And finally, one day I get a phone call. The guy's name is Dr. Jerome Corsi. And I'm having this conversation. It's a great conversation. And he's taking my product. And we're, in my head, you're having these conversations. Sometimes you're like, I don't know why I'm on the phone. Like every minute is important. I don't know why I'm on this call. And then I think I Googled him while we were conversing. And he's a 2-time New York Times #1 bestseller. It's an amazing feat to be on the bestseller list, to be a #1 twice, right? And in my head, as I saw that, I was like, oh, that's why we're talking, because you're going to be my co-author. And sure enough, everything aligned with what he was trying to accomplish and kind of move into the health space. And obviously me wanting to write a book and to share with you. In my mind, this was going to be him interviewing me and then going off and writing the book, and then me reading it and going, that's a great book, and and signing off on it and it being done. And our first meeting to really kind of start the project off, he was like, so you need to write your story down. And so I was like, I guess I'm going to write a book, actually me write a book. And it was quite a compliment. He said that he really did actually like my writing style. He did a great job cleaning it up and making it better prose. But he liked my storytelling, that I'm kind of self-deprecating. I certainly don't think too much of myself. I think that's important. And so I think we really ended up writing a good book. He had contacts, because he's a 2-time New York #1 bestseller. So we've got it published by Post Hill Press. Post Hill Press, they publish a lot of stuff. I think they do a lot of textbooks. Um, and and so that was already in place, and it actually came out like 3 months ago. And I really, because of what we're eventually going to talk about today on the podcast, I haven't had time to even get on podcasts like yours and share the book. So we're really kind of doing a 1-2 punch here, sharing the book and sharing a longevity summit.
Yeah, well, it's the same theme. The core of it is longevity and increasing health span. Because I know a lot of people, they hear about all this anti-aging stuff, longevity, and they're like, well, I don't want to live an extra 30 years, 40 years, and require assistance for the final quarter of my life or whatever it is. It's like, that's not the end goal for most people interested in this space, is how can we increase those final years, the functionality of those final years, so you're able to do the things that you're really good at doing and you enjoy doing. Longevity supplements specifically seem to have the highest incidence of counterfeit products, adulterated products, contaminated products. There's been a bunch of news articles that I've actually posted about, and one for a category called like the NAD plus precursors, NMN specifically. And there was like a finding that I think it was like 30 brands on Amazon that people thought they were getting good quality products from were actually completely devoid of the NMN, the active ingredient itself. And it had a bunch of other stuff in there, but you want to trust that what you're getting is actually what it says on the label. And since these supplements are often more expensive than like a vitamin C or a lot of vitamins and sometimes minerals, it can be like a big waste of money for a lot of people. So it's nice to hear that some people actually care about the consumer and are doing the appropriate testing and sharing those results where applicable.
Yeah, I think with Amazon, you really do need to be careful. It's not the place. Okay, our products are on Amazon, right? Because it's just convenience for some of our customers, like Amazon Prime. By the way, we deliver as fast. But if you go and you use their rating system to try and understand the value, quality, efficacy of a product, you really need to think about, is that a good decision, right? Because I don't know if I gave this example on the last podcast I was on, but when you think about what does a 5-star review about a supplement on Amazon mean? Take, for example, vitamin C. We can be pretty sure that they didn't weigh, at least not on a scientific scale, each of the tablets. Let's say it's a 1 gram vitamin C. They didn't weigh each of the tablets on a quality scale, so they don't know if they're 1 gram. They didn't crush it up and check with an HPLC to see if it's ascorbic acid. They didn't do that. Frankly, if the container's not even significantly low, they didn't count them. So a 5-star, I kind of joke that it means they didn't die before they left, before Amazon pressured them enough, emailed them enough to like, hey, leave a review.
There's also issues on Amazon with buying from a vendor who claims to be selling the product that you're looking for, and they might even have the same label. And I've heard multiple instances. I saw one of those, and I reached out to the company and asked about their Amazon listing. And they came back to me and said, "What do you mean our Amazon listing? We don't sell on Amazon." So it was a third-party vendor that signed up with Amazon to sell the products, and it was a complete counterfeit product, made-up label. Who knows what was actually in it? I did not buy it, but I've seen that kind of thing happening enough. And there's also the issue of like the review process. Tons of scam, like fake reviews created by bots. And if people are leaving reviews, it's either 5-star or 1-star, when in reality, there's probably a lot in between. There should be a lot in between, but you don't see them very often.
Your example is a reason that it makes sense. If you're in the supplement business, you probably should have your product on Amazon, because you should be aware of what's going on related to your name and trademark or whatever on the Amazon space.
Since we talked last, must have been 6 months ago, I want to say. Has anything changed in the C60 supplement industry? Have any like new studies come out? Any new findings? Because if I was to recap, like the reason that people tend to take it, it's multifactorial. A big portion of people using C60 report better energy, which makes sense because it helps the mitochondria, the energy factories, as they're often referred to in high school biology, be more efficient and create energy without as much, I call it cellular exhaust or reactive oxygen species. It also can help improve sleep, depending on if that's an Achilles heel of yours. It can help with mental clarity. It can help protect DNA and have obvious longevity benefits, at least in the current research and the animal models and everything that we were seeing. What are the other big things that you're seeing?
There are constantly papers coming out that are just talking about really the molecule and its positive effect. Um, a number of them are talking about it as an anti-inflammatory, right? So we're very comfortable talking about it as an antioxidant. And you mentioned, we've got peer-reviewed published research that shows it in the mitochondria, which makes it a very unique antioxidant, right? Vitamin C doesn't get there. In fact, the resident antioxidants are glutathione and melatonin. Interesting. Melatonin, the sleep hormone, right? And so our most consistent testimonial is people take it in the morning, they report mental focus and energy during the day, and then better sleep that night. And so we there are papers that are getting published quite regularly. I think and this is not to be a Debbie Downer, but one of the challenges that I see is, some companies have come out with water soluble versions. There's no toxicity data on those. I actually personally don't think that they would be toxic, but I wouldn't take them without some of the standard toxicity tests that need to be done. So you got water soluble. There's a group out there selling like supercharged C60, which is actually nano onions, and they're just kind of piggybacking off of the C60 name, but they actually don't have much, if any, C60 in it. And the C60 that they probably had would be a deformed version because it's really nano onions. And what a nano onion is, you imagine you've got C60 and you can just have sphere after sphere, like layers of an onion. And then if you cut that in half, right, you've got an open-ended cage, and that's a very different molecular structure than a closed cage, right? You can imagine how it interacts with chemicals around it is substantially different. Again, there's no data on it. There's no toxicity data. This stuff is not documented to be safe.
If you were to incorporate C60 or your version ESS60, which is the version that's better for humans and safer, because one of the issues with C60 production in general is that most companies use a very cheap version as like an industrial waste product because it's way, way less expensive. And at the same time, then you're introducing a lot of carcinogens and other toxic things that you don't want that'll probably do more damage than the C60 will do good. So if you get a good high quality C60, what do you like to pair it with? Are there any other ingredients or molecules?
Yeah, I know there's some talk out there that you should kind of take it with hydrogen, take it with an apple because apple provides hydrogen. I'm not aware of any data that supports that. For me, I just tend to take it separately. Here's my very specific routine, right? So in the morning, I do kind of a bulletproof coffee. This is our MCT version. By the way, this black carbon powder turns a beautiful purple color in MCT. So MCT is usually pretty clear. So it's just gorgeous. You got to love chemistry for that. So I put about a teaspoon and a half of our MCT in my coffee. And then while that's blending, because it's oil and water, so it doesn't mix well, then I'll take a teaspoon and a half of our olive oil product. And so that really starts my day. As soon as I got it as part of my coffee routine, I was able to stop the madness, right? When we first were bringing this to market and I was first starting to take it on a regular basis, it wasn't part of any routine. And I could always find, it would get 2 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and might be yawning, thinking I need a nap or maybe another cup of coffee. I could always look back and remember I hadn't taken the My Vital C that morning. That doesn't happen anymore. So MCT in my coffee, olive oil as a separate dose, and then I'm typically having a salad for lunch, and so I'll put our avocado on that. And again, most consistent testimonial: better focus, better energy, and then better sleep that night.
What about combining it with other longevity ingredients? I know there might not be data on them, but is it going to be safe? Say I have like an all-in-one product that contains an NAD booster, a precursor, and it has, say, spermidine or quercetin or fisetin. A lot of these other, there's just so many hot longevity products and supplements out there. Would this have a synergistic effect, would you imagine, or could it be possibly detrimental?
My approach would be, so carbon, there are some characteristics in terms of reactivity that are similar to activated charcoal. right? And so activated charcoal you wouldn't want to take with a lot of things because it tends to bind to things and then you would just excrete it. So I would take them separately. You really don't want them kind of mixing in your stomach. So I would tend to take those things separately. But other than that, and that's just a thought process. I don't have any data to suggest that. In fact, in the supplement space, our sole responsibility to the FDA is if we have any serious, severe side effects from reported by any customer, we have to report that to the FDA. By the way, that doesn't mean the FDA shut us down. Like if somebody has allergic reaction to something, maybe the olive oil, which is actually extremely rare, to be allergic to olive oil, we haven't had to report anything. So it's not that the FDA is going to say, hey, you're going to report this and then now you're shut down. It's you're going to report this because we need to have a data log of serious adverse effects.
Chris, I'm sure from your research into the book you wrote, as well as for being the MC of the Longevity Summit, you came across what are called the hallmarks of aging. There was once 3, then there was 9, now there's 12, and of course, in a couple of years, there'll probably be 25. But when you were looking into those, did you see anything about how, like, what hallmarks C60 could work on? Because one of the theories of aging was like the free radical, the redox status theory of aging, where it's like, if you blunt all of the reactive oxygen species, all the oxidative stress, all the like cellular debris that's accumulating from energy production and other things, then that would slow down aging, perhaps even stop it. Then when they actually began doing trials into high dose antioxidants indiscriminately, not C60, but other ones, they found that it actually didn't have that effect. And in some cases, it had a worse outcome. And that's why there's a lot of hype around molecular hydrogen, because it's more discriminate. It only selectively blocks certain free radicals. So what about C60 there? Have you come across anything about the hallmarks of aging it's impacting?
When I used to first tell the story of the rats living 90% longer, right? By the way, the next best way to live longer is calorie restriction. If you reduce your calories by 30%, you can extend your life by 30%. When I tell the story about these rats living 90% longer, the first question out of many people was, what is the mechanism? How is this happening? You mentioned one of the kind of hallmarks of aging, what the medical community kind of ascribes aging to be, an oxidative process. And that makes sense, right? We're used to like steel rusting. If we've got these reactive oxygen species that are running around doing oxidative damage, then that can be problematic. And if we can manage that, and you're right, there are studies that show actually in some cases it's detrimental. If you're working hard to build muscle, it does such a dampering effect on the hormesis process that you actually aren't having the positive impacts that you want to have. So that's debatable. At a minimum, we know that we're a good antioxidant, 125 times more powerful than vitamin C. Also knowing that we get into the mitochondria and operate differently than the traditional antioxidants that are located in the mitochondria, right? So we mentioned glutathione, melatonin, the 2 resident antioxidants. We understand that different mitochondria can get depleted from time to time. And so that's where we think this ESS60 molecule, we've known from the 90s when this molecule was discovered, that it can hold up to 6 negatively charged particles. Turns out reactive oxygen species are negatively charged particles. So this is actually, the theory is called the BOSS theory, buffering oxidative stress system. And so you can actually hold up to 6 negatively charged reactive oxygen species on the exterior of this cage. Current thought process is twofold. One, that prevents them from doing damage, right? Until that particular mitochondria can replenish the glutathione or the melatonin to actually bind to those reactive oxygen species and deal with them appropriately. But the other is it still does leave them available for signaling. So we do know now, and I don't know if it was 10 years ago, we really just thought of reactive oxygen species as a negative component. They are actually signaling molecules. And so you do need the signaling molecules of their presence because, right, they're basically signaling, hey, there's stress. This mitochondria over here can't handle me. So the rest of you guys need to start doing stuff because that guy's worn out, right? Like it's a signaling molecule. We do believe that this allows the ESS60 molecule allows the signaling to continue, right? So it really has like all these positive effects and then none of the negative effects. So that's kind of on the antioxidant side. when you get into anti-inflammatory, and what I told you, a lot of the papers, I touched on one recently. They did a study in beagles, and they were talking about how it positively impact their inflammatory markers, and to a significant degree. We just got to be careful. The FDA has very strict guidelines on what we can say about anti-inflammatories or our anti-inflammatory effect. What they do allow us to say is we address inflammation associated with exercise-induced inflammation, right? So we've all had a tough workout. We've all had, maybe just a long walk one day, and we woke up the next day and we're feeling that inflammation in our body. We absolutely address that type of inflammation. The other types of inflammation, we just got to do more research, because what the FDA says is those types of inflammation that we need to do more research on to be able to talk about are directly associated really with the classic diseases of aging, which is Alzheimer's, arthritis, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and you can imagine, as I'm listing off those very particular diseases, you need very particular studies in order to start talking about those and having a positive impact there.
Yeah, and I think it's Hippocrates who's he's credited with saying that inflammation is the root of all disease. And so if you're supporting healthy inflammation, or you're optimizing inflammation, as you might be allowed to say, then that could obviously have all kinds of downstream impacts on things that you might even assume are related to inflammation.
Yeah, we've got testimonials literally from head to toe, right? So this is probably a good point. The FDA has not evaluated our product. It is not intended to treat, diagnose, cure, or prevent any disease. But we've got testimonials from head to toe. This is just from oral consumption of hair growing faster, hair growing back original color. The toe one that I like, we were working with a guy, former Navy SEAL, and when he was 5 years old, a crab bit him on his big toe and split his big toenail. The toenail was split from age 5 into like age 65. And then now it is no longer split. So literally we have testimonials from head to toe. People are like, well, what's the mechanism of action? We can kind of speak about theories associated with the mechanism of action related to longevity. What's the mechanism of action for all these benefits? And that's where this BOSS theory, again, buffering oxidative stress system, really starts to have some meat to it, right? Really starts to explain those types of testimonials.
That makes sense. Well, let's go on to your own personal longevity routine now that you've emceed a summit and you have written a book and that this is your wheelhouse. So I'm always curious what other people are doing for their longevity, because I have my routines. I created a mini micro course on the foundations of longevity that I think are often overlooked, but they can really move the needle the most. And I'm curious what in your life you're doing to live to a optimal old age where you're still fully functional.
In hindsight, I was looking at one of the biggest things that you can do, and this was reiterated again and again and again, is your diet is so extremely important. And a lot of people, it's not just diet, it's not just macros, right? So you're talking about macros or your carbs, your fats, and your proteins. They're actually food sensitivities that you need to be aware of, and that's very different than food allergies. You can be allergic to peanuts, and that's clearly bad, but you could be sensitive to peanuts, and you could be causing a leaky gut. And that leaky gut, and we may get into that a little bit more, that leaky gut starts causing autoimmune problems. And most of these bad experiences that people are having are these autoimmune. So I think it's worth getting that. So diet just came out really important. And I look at what I'm doing right now, and the irony is my diet is not any of the 55 guys. Although I certainly incorporate probably more of Gundry's stuff than anybody else's. I'm actually following the Alex Hormozi diet. He is an influencer, an extremely successful business entrepreneur. He built a company called Gym Launch, and I think he sold it for like $42 million. And his is just it's protein. And here was the kind of criteria, which is, I mean, he literally in his video, he's like, if you want a healthy way to consume protein, you need to watch another video. I'm just going to show you how to eat a lot of protein, right? And he's just like straight up front. Here's his criteria. Here was kind of the things that resonated with me. He's an incredibly successful entrepreneur. So busy building a company. He's had a 6-pack for 20 years. And he eats cookies every day. That's not his whole meal. It's really based on protein. Get your protein consumption right, and then the rest you just fill in the gap, and then probably take a multivitamin because you have a lot of stuff that you might be missing. Um, and so since I've started that, one, my muscle mass has increased, so I feel really good about that. But then I'm eating, it turns out for me, it's 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. That's actually the same thing that Dave Asprey says. It's actually the same thing, watching Huberman talk with some protein experts. These are the same numbers across the board. And the important thing is when you think in terms of macros, you shouldn't be thinking in terms of like 30, 30, 30, right? 30% protein, 30% carbs, 30% fat, or any ratio like that. The mindset is you should be thinking about this much protein, period, fact, end of day, don't non-negotiable, right? And maybe not normal, right? Not what most people are doing. And then the rest is just the calories to get you to a certain point. By the way, a lot of protein isn't readily available in terms of calories. There's a lot of processing that happens, so you can actually eat more. Also, some of the people that I interviewed talk about different food sensitivity tests. So I will be doing that, and that will be, I think, an important thing that's coming out of the summit for me.
Yeah. Okay. There is a lot to unpack there. But first, with the whole protein thing, like that is it's probably the number one diet, weight loss, muscle building thing that people can do. Most people grossly overestimate just how much protein they're getting. They all think that, oh, I eat cheese, I had cashews, I get plenty of protein. And then if you actually put those into a macronutrient calculator, you log just 1 day of eating, 2 days of eating, you'll see that most people are getting hardly over like half their body weight in protein. And yeah, you're right. Like the optimal amount is like 0.83 to like 1.1 or 1.2 grams of protein per pound, depending on how active you are, how big you are, your age. As you get older, protein becomes more important too because you become anabolic resistant, like resistant to putting on and maintaining muscle mass. So all that's incredibly important. And once you do that, there's a thermic effect of eating protein. So 1 calorie of protein consumed is not the equivalent of 1 gram of fat consumed. You actually burn about 30% of it just to metabolize and use the protein for fuel. And that brings up another point that I want to ask you about, and that is the role of mTOR versus AMPK. This is like a cellular energy balance system the body has. It can either be on like repair and recycling and autophagy mode, or it can be on grow and expand and build muscle mode, which is like mTOR dominance. A lot of people in the longevity space specifically are very worried about protein because it does activate mTOR. And a lot of people constantly eat. They're not intermittent fasting and they're constantly not even pulsing mTOR, but it's constantly keeping it stimulated. It's not as well known that other things such as caloric surplus or even carbohydrates also activate mTOR. But I'm curious if you're at all concerned about that from consuming a protein-rich diet.
I think I kind of fell into this again backwards because if you think about it, I'm following the diet of an entrepreneur. Granted, he was in the fitness space, but I think what I'm doing that really balances that out is the intermittent fasting. So I ascribed, I don't know how long ago, maybe this was 15 years ago, where they're like, you need to eat 6 to 8 times a day in little small meals. And you look back in hindsight and you're like, how did this even become an option, right? Now we're like, you need to be hungry. By the way, so I've got conflicting attitudes on this, but let me talk about it first, and then I'll talk about the conflict, what I'm conflicted about. As we evolved, we were hungry a lot. Like that is the reality. So our bodies evolved to be hungry. So there's this kind of mindset, the paleo diet, where you want to go back to your kind of evolutionary roots. But I think you need to be really careful because we were only supposed to live to like 35, right? If you think most of our existence, we were dead by 35. Extreme outliers made it to 45, maybe, somebody in their 60s. I don't even know why this guy is still here because that just never happened. So my goal has always been 125, we in no way have we evolved to get to 125. So at the same point, you want to optimize your body for how it evolved, but understand that also might not be the best thing. I mean, just as an example, a great way to extend your life is a 30% calorie restriction. And that's counter to kind of anything evolutionary. Evolutionary is like get food anytime you get a chance and much of it as you can. And so I think you do need to be careful. And I think the long and short answer is, yeah, I'm consuming lots of protein, but I do have 18 hours where I'm fasted. I have a little bit of milk in my coffee, so there's a little cheat there. But the reality is, if you're getting hungry, then and you're sustaining that hunger for some number of hours, then you're probably in a fasted state that's good enough for you to start kind of counteracting, the mTOR activation that might be coming from the protein.
And what's really interesting, well, I guess a couple things. First, a lot of the research that shows like that our ancestors had really much shorter lifespans. If you actually segment out the deaths due to improper sanitization and deaths during childbearing or the early years, the sheer lifespan improvement that we've had over the last century, let's say, or even the last couple decades, isn't as impressive as you'd otherwise think.
The big one is infant mortality. If you take infant mortality out of it, have we really extended life by that much? And I think the answer is no. And then you couple that with the fact that we've recently experienced a couple years of decline, where the average age has actually declined. And a lot of people might go, oh, well, COVID and everything that happened. No, it was I think 2 to 3 years. Two of the two to well, I'm kind of roughly here, right? 2 of the 5 years before COVID, we had declines, and so we're actually moving in the wrong direction. I don't think, certainly here in the United States, obesity is the big thing, right? That's the thing that would be causing this decline. But yeah, there's a lot of factors to take into. It's the other reason I'm really excited about being in this longevity space is because we have such a backwards mindset about old age. This is really kind of born out of Dr. David Sinclair's book, Lifespan, where he's talking about, we are currently fund Alzheimer's and arthritis and cardiovascular disease and cancer, all independently. And they are all significantly dependent on age. And so if we could just take all those funds and focus on age, the reality is if you solve cancer, you extend life, I think, some menial 5 years. The next disease is ready to take its place, the next disease of aging. So it makes more sense to address aging. And if you could throw all of that money there, you're in fact going to be addressing all of those kind of classic diseases of aging.
Exactly. That's why they're pushing to reclassify aging as a disease. A couple things also that you mentioned that you like to intermittent fast and get a little bit of that hunger. And I think that's a lost concept, that those hunger hormones and neurotransmitters and other things going on in your body, like those biochemical processes, they actually have benefits. It's like you don't want to always feel fully satiated. Like your biology actually thrives with, say, a little bit of ghrelin. Like that's good for the brain. It's good for insulin. It's good for a bunch of different things. And if we just completely remove that aspect of being hungry because it's uncomfortable, it can be uncomfortable, then we're also going to be missing out on some of those.
And I was just listening to a Huberman podcast. I think it was the one with David Goggins. And I've got more research to do on it, but he was talking about when you do things that you don't enjoy, when you force yourself to do things that you don't want to do, there's actually a part of your brain that gets bigger. And this becomes a willpower thing, right? We all have tried to willpower a situation and ultimately failed, right? We've all had that experience. But the more you're putting yourself in a situation I don't want to do this. Think about Michael Phelps. He swam the same pool. This is the exact same pool and ate the same, 10,000 calories because he was burning so many calories every day for decades, not for years, for decades. And look at the success he's got. And I think that applies across the board. You really do have to be able to kind of willpower yourself to do these boring things for the success that you may be looking for.
One thing that I love to do as a way of making some of these uncomfortable habits more appealing is a little biochemical trick. And it's something like taking a nicotine patch, for example. And if you don't ever use nicotine, that's pretty much the only way I'd ever use it. And if you hate going on a jog, then when you jog, you put the nicotine patch on before. So you literally alter your physiology to respond positively, to feel good as you're doing that new habit that's uncomfortable. And it doesn't have to be nicotine. It's just the point is to pair things that you really like with something that you don't like, so you can make that association more favorable and positive.
That's a great hack. Wow, like that's a phenomenal hack because yeah, nicotine really fires off some positive hormones. I'm assuming inside our body, but certainly generates positive emotions. And to give yourself that little reward.
The part that's the most exciting about the little hack that I was mentioning is that, yeah, you can do that and you can build that association. And then what's cool about it is that eventually you remove the nicotine patch, you remove the nootropics, whatever it is. You still have that same elation from the habit that otherwise sucks because your body is anticipating. It's kind of like Pavlov's dogs. Earlier, you were mentioning the diet front, the importance of understanding food sensitivities. And that's something that I've talked about for a very long time. There's pretty much not a single food out there, I can't think of any, that someone doesn't demonize. Whether it's meat, it's some kind of plant, it's an animal product, it doesn't matter. Someone's vilifying it somewhere. And so I think a big portion of the vilification comes from people being sensitive to certain foods and not necessarily allergic. It's not like you won't eat something and all of a sudden break out in hives. Like that's not what this is about, but it's like little things that are causing inflammation that you don't even know you're intolerant to. And you keep consuming them on a daily basis. And I think that's why some of the diets that are like ultra restrictive, such as carnivore or like strict zero carb keto, people tend to feel great on initially in terms of like, because they're removing so many of the potential allergen or intolerances.
Sensitives, yeah.
Sensitivities, exactly. And so then once you remove those, then all of a sudden you feel good because you're not introducing that, and you bring them back and you get some confirmation bias because it's like, well, I was feeling great. Now I'm not feeling as good because you just introduce whatever it was again. And that's why like rotation diets are an excellent tool to help figure out what some of those are without going on like a very long-term, like really strict diet plan. It's just like spacing the foods out that are common intolerances. But when you eat them, you keep a food log for a couple of days and you notice, okay, I eat this and 45 minutes later, I feel brain fog or I feel low energy or I feel whatever. And eventually you'll pinpoint what foods or types of foods or preparations of foods are causing the most problems.
Dr. Gundry just came out with a book called Gut Check. And in that book, he mentions leaky gut 102 times. And one of my questions to him was kind of funny, was like, you say in your book, leaky gut equals leaky brain, leaky gut equals leaky bones, leaky gut equals leaky heart, leaky gut equals, all right, Dr. Gundry, we get it. Leaky gut, it's a problem. It's not good. So what's the solution? And one of the things that he shared in the interview is that he's actually actively seeing patients. And he says 100% of his patients, whether they've given up wheat or not, right? 100% of them still have wheat antibodies in their system. So wheat antibodies are, like, just for your audience who probably knows, like, you consume a wheat product, gluten is the biggest lectin. Gluten is this kind of chemical that wheat uses to defend itself against plants. Hey, eat this, you stupid animal, and feel the pain, feel the wrath of my gluten. And then that causes problems in our system. But there's a whole other collection of lectins. And when they get through the gut, they're not supposed to be. They're supposed to get broken down, and then our body uses those components. But if you've got a leaky gut, those components get through the gut and into the bloodstream. And now that they're in the bloodstream, your body starts creating antibodies to them. So you can see that these things have gotten to places that they're not because there's antibodies associated. He says 100% of his patients. By the way, his patients are coming to him because they have problems, right? And it's not just wheat problems, but they're having problems, and 100% have some antibodies to wheat. And then they resolve over a year, probably by getting really strict about what actually has wheat in it. And I'll share, there's a really good story that he shares that you have all these, the sensitivities tend to be, right, like wheat and grain, including corn, right? Those are the two kind of key offenders. And then milk products. And then there was one more, it'll probably come up, but, and eggs, because this is the example. Is one of his clients was pretty high up in a social media company, having lots of aches and pains. And they did some wheat sensitivity. There's actually wheat zoomer is the name of the test to find out if you got antibodies. They also did egg zoomer, so all these zoomers. And this particular patient was at the time, very sensitive to eggs. And he's like, you're going to have to cut out eggs. And the guy, the social media guy, was like, I eat an omelet every day. I can't do that. And Dr. Gundry was like, well, you're the one in pain. Like, you're like, you actually, you're right. You don't have to quit the eggs. You have to quit the eggs to get out of this pain. So a couple months later, he's, hasn't been eating eggs, and he's like, hey, can we do another sensitivity test for eggs? Sure enough, it was drastically reduced or not there. And so they could start introducing egg whites. And the guy, like 3 days later, calls Dr. Gundry, and he's like, I'm all achy again. And Dr. Gundry, like in his voice, was like, what did you do? And he goes, well, so 2 days ago, I had an egg white omelet for breakfast, and then I had one for lunch, and then I had one for dinner, and then I did the same thing yesterday, and then I had one for breakfast today, and then now I'm actually, in pain. Well, like saying that you can go back to egg doesn't mean like you can have them all the time.
I mean, that's the core utility of the rotation diet. Some people will stick with it for life, but the vast majority of people who use it, it's just to identify, because even the food sensitivity tests, what they often come back with is just a list of all the foods you eat the most often. Because if your gut isn't, if there's any permeability and you eat it, your body is going to register that as a problematic food. And I've even done an interview that's coming out soon on a newer form of medicine called Germanic New Medicine. And the interviewee, she was mentioning how if you have a traumatic experience, if you get into a big fight while you're eating a particular food, then your body learns to associate that food with that experience. And so even if you're eating a food that might be very healthy for you, and it might have been healthy for you your entire life, you had no problem with it, all of a sudden, even at age 40, 50, 60, you can develop an intolerance because of that association.
We interact with our food, react to our food very differently. So I think that's a very key component. And when you talk about people go on to the individual diets and they have a positive experience, so they have some weight loss, I think a lot of that, and you touched on it. I say it a little different. I think is that most of what you're doing is getting off of the standard American diet, right? Like, and if you just do that and eat, relatively healthy, even if you're sensitive to it, it's going to be better than all of these processed foods that you were consuming before. And so you are going to see positive impacts. And then, when you start to cycle new things into that, which are going to be probably in the direction of the American standard diet, you're going to go back to where you are. So it really is about figuring out a diet that you can sustain. I love the idea of changing every 4 days. I just got to figure out right now I can cook in bulk, and I actually try and put a lot of, basil and rosemary and all sorts of things to get a lot of variety. But it would be better to figure out how to very segment these very rigidly so that I'm not getting the same thing, except every fifth day.
Yeah. Well, that's also part of the wisdom of the ancient cultures. Like Ayurveda advocates seasonal eating. They have 3 different seasons in their system. And by varying what you're eating, matching the local fauna and flora of your neighborhood, of your city and state, then you're going to naturally be introducing these break points where you're giving your body a rest. And even with things like wheat, you'll notice that people have different experiences. Like they can't eat the wheat here in the US, but if they go abroad to France, it's fine. And part of it's probably the way we're spraying the wheat, the way we're processing, whether you use stone mill or steel mill. But then there's also a lot of other differences in that. It's not as simple as just that this food is bad for everyone always. Even if you have that sensitivity to wheat in the US, you might not have it there. And those systems, such as Ayurveda, they advocated having wheat during certain seasons of the year. For example, in the fall, you do it because it irritates the gut lining and stimulates the immune system. For the winter, when you want that bolstered immunity, but they didn't recommend eating it in high doses year round. And they also didn't have the same crop technology that we have now that could be causing some of the issues.
Yeah, I think you might be referring to glyphosate as one of the crop technologies, and then also GMO, which I've got a engineering background. When I first came to understand GMO, genetically modified organisms, I'm like, well, this is how we make more food. This is clearly good, right? The challenge, really kind of digging into it, I think it was in Gundry's book, The Plant Paradox. The challenge is what GMO is typically doing is making the crops more resistant to insects, right? Well, you do that by enhancing either how detrimental the lectins are to those insects or how many lectins are available, right? So maybe you're adding more lectins. And though if the insects don't want to eat it, we're close enough kind of biologically that we also get irritated. We get leaky gut from that same protein. And so it turns out like for me now, yeah, I do want to stay away from GMOs whenever I can.
And it's one thing to have that impact on our human cells, but it's easy to overlook the fact that we have a thriving ecosystem of microbial cells in our gut, which, if it's impacting other microbes, might also be impacting the ones inside of us.
So you mentioned microbes, and that came up a lot, right? Because diet's going to come up a lot. I had an amazing conversation with Colleen Cutcliffe. She's with Pendulum, and they have a product called Akkermansia, right? It's a gut bacteria. It's a keystone bacteria in our gut. They didn't even know it existed, I think, 10 years ago or something, right? So it was discovered, I think, in 2005. That would be 20 years. It's an anaerobic bacteria. As soon as, typically the way you would understand a microbe in your gut biome is you take a stool sample and you cultivate it in a petri dish. Well, this particular Akkermansia dies as soon as it's exposed to oxygen. And so we didn't even know it existed. And it's a kind of amazing how medical technology is changing. And that was also a theme, is how quickly things are changing. But actually having mapped out the genome allowed us to look at these dead genes, right? Because the Akkermansia dies, but you can still get the genetic material. And like, hey, there's this organism here that we were not aware of, and it turns out to be key. It's actually the thing that kind of goes in. You imagine like the Golden Gate Bridge. They have to paint it every 7 years, and it takes 7 years to paint, and then they come back. Well, your mucus lining in your stomach has that same effect. It's not 7 years, but you got to clean out the old mucus and then relay the new mucus so that you've got fresh mucus all the time. Akkermansia is actually a bacteria that does this. Obviously, really important. Again, a keystone.
And Akkermansia is really cool. There's a book called I want to say Immunity Code by Joel Green, and he talks about a natural way of like upregulating your production. And you use HMO powder, you use apple peel powder specifically, and you use some like polyphenol rich, like red berries type stuff, and you consume that for 21 days, 30 days, and you can help increase your natural like population of Akkermansia. And I created a controversial video the other day about like some of the downsides of long-term keto and carnivore and things to be aware of if you're planning on pursuing that for life or at least for a very long period of time. But that can absolutely wipe out certain species of bacteria and other microbes that you don't necessarily have the ability to restore. We don't even know the full details of how it's changing that composition, but it can have like multi-generational lasting effects if you just follow, say, a carnivore diet strictly, don't eat any fiber at all for long periods of time, and then you go off of it a month or say a year later, you won't necessarily be able to recover those without some kind of assistance.
That apple peel you're talking about, like basically providing a prebiotic to it. She's got a product called glucose control that includes Akkermansia and a couple other bacteria that are really triggering the same component that's in, what's the diet drug? The name just escaped me. Well, so my understanding is metformin actually enhances Akkermansia. Now, I haven't seen the data. I just kind of heard that from a couple of people. Again, I always get more research to do after almost every single interaction. Ozempic, right?
Oh,
That's
yeah,
looking
GLP.
at, I think, yeah. So Akkermansia actually does elicit that same response. Not to the same degree, like you're not, injecting it into your system, but it does have some of those positive impacts.
There's some cool longevity supplements that also impact GLP-1, and I think it's like OEA and PEA. I think OEA for sure. And I interviewed a company called Mimeo Health, and they have a product that does that. It's like nature's alternative to Ozempic and Mounjaro and all those, because it helps satiate appetite and can indirectly lead to weight loss. But enough about the microbes. We're running low on time now. I'd love to know more about some of the other like surprising takeaways, the things that you found like very impactful from hosting the summit.
There are probably two keys. I asked every single expert, how long do you want to live? And how long do you think humans can live? And I think a fascinating result out of 55 experts in the longevity space is only 3 gave the same number. Because logically, if I believe humans can live to 120, and that was a common name, right? So we have Jean Clement, the oldest living human at this point, passed at 122. Little concerns about maybe documentation. But if we can live to 120, why don't you want to live to 120? Right? And I think it goes back to this inability to separate longevity, living longer, from living debilitated and infirmed. Right? It's so ingrained. Even talking to a longevity expert, they're like, I think we can live to 120, but I don't want to get there. Right? Or I think we can live to 120, but I just want to live as long as I'm capable, right? As long as I have mental, physical, and emotional capabilities, then that's when I want to pass. And again, that's even in the longevity space of experts. There is no separation. So I thought that was fascinating. And then everybody's kind of responses, we broke it down into what are the tricks, right? I asked every expert 2 to 3 tricks, tips, mindsets for protocol. For living longer.
What were some of the top ones there?
Not surprising. Top 4: sleep, exercise, diet, and mindset. Right?
Interesting. I'd expect there to be something to do with community and like social well-being
that
there.
Was there 15%. Right? So 15% mentioned that. When I first saw it, so sleep was 33%, so right at a third, right? Exercise 52%, diet was 52%, and mindset was 46%. And then we got some cool Ayurvedic one interview I did. She was talking about scrape your tongue with a copper tongue scraper. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, we got some stuff that didn't fit the norm, but were still good ideas.
Yeah, I love that, and I also think that exercise is overrated and movement is underrated. So I love to see that scale shifting and people doing a lot more like low intensity stuff. Because if you look at the longest lived populations, they don't have gyms. They haven't had gyms. They haven't been doing this insane level of strength training, of VO2 max training, but they are highly active. They do move throughout the day. And yes, I also am a big fan of these like structured exercise sessions and strength training and VO2 max training and getting all these done. But for your average person, just to being less sedentary this day and age, to stand up more, to kneel more, to change bodily positions, to walk a lot. Like I even saw a couple of studies about longevity and the optimal dose of like exercise, not movement, but exercise for longevity. And there is like a fairly low cap on the high end of how much we should be exercising, but there's no cap on the amount of low intensity physical movement we should be doing.
Ben Greenfield talked about setting your workplace environment with like a kettlebell and a pull-up bar so that you're taking those breaks, getting some fitness in, right? Getting some movement in, and obviously having a treadmill. He did his interview on a treadmill. And so that if you get to the gym at the end of the day, it's a bonus. It's optional. Like you've gotten your movement throughout the day because you've created the environment the right way. And I thought that was just some fabulous advice.
I'm not surprised that mindset came up as one of the top ones either, Chris, because if you think about it, if you're waking up every day thinking to myself, oh, where am I in pain? What am I going to even do? Like, I feel like I'm slowly dying, I'm decaying, whatever, like that negativity, it's having a direct impact on your entire physiology and psychology constantly. And that can be a low grade stressor or even a high grade stressor because your body doesn't differentiate between like real physical imminent danger stress and emotional psychological stress. And so I think if you don't have the right mindset about longevity, what it means that you want to live a long time in good health and ideal health, then I could see how that would really be number one.
I would agree. And I think if you have any doubts about how important mindset is, then you need only look to the fact that we are the only species on the planet who has more deaths on Monday. Every other species dies the same amount every day of the week because we have something to look forward through the weekend and then nothing in the week. For those who don't have anything to look forward to, they are significantly more likely to die, on Monday. Like that's a stat about mindset, really.
It's interesting also that humans are like circadian creatures. We live on like a 24-hour rhythm. But then if you actually like zoom out, you'll realize that there's also, I forget what it's called, the septidian rhythm, something like that. And it's like a 7-day cycle. And you can look at certain days of the week and see that certain things are more common on Mondays, certain are more on Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays. Throughout, it's not just on Mondays, and there's some interesting research around that. And then women obviously have more fluctuation depending on like the monthly cycle, but then also like the annual cycle of the seasons and everything. So you can see how the different time frames like really influence who we are and the way we operate, not just the 24-hour circadian rhythm. Well, Chris, we are going to start to wind down now. If people want to connect with you, to tune in to the longevity supplement, to try some of your supplements, how can they go about that?
Yeah. So, one, we're going to have a link to the Longevity Summit in the show notes, right? So make sure you check out the show notes, follow that link. Again, it's free. It's from February 26th through March 3rd. There's an encore weekend the following weekend, but you'll have access to 7 to 8 videos per day. And then like $99 will get you just buy it so you have access to everything. We've actually got a link for you if anybody's interested in trying my product. This is the whole reason that kind of I'm in the longevity space is the product, and it's myvitalc.com/urban. That will get them to your landing page. And then there's a coupon code that works on that landing page, which is urban. That gives them $15 off their initial order. People are asking, we've got olive oil product, an avocado product, and an MCT product. Which one should I try? The olive oil product for sure. There's 2 reasons. One, we're a science-backed organization, and all the research is in olive oil, so do that. Also, the highest concentration of this soccer ball-shaped molecule is in the olive oil, and so those are the reasons we would recommend that. You can buy a single bottle. You actually get a 25% discount if you go on subscription. So in addition to using that Urban for $15 off, just go on subscription. You can cancel at any time. Our customer service team, I think they're at like 850 5-star reviews. So they're not trained to talk you out of canceling your subscription. Just take advantage of that discount. You can find the book on that page, or you can go to livelongerandbetterbook.com. It's also there. The book's like $20. It is available on Amazon, but if you buy it from us, you can get a signed copy. That's $10 extra for the signed copy. That full $10 goes to a charity. It's called Operation Underground Railroad. They just had the movie The Sound of Freedom out. I actually saw him speak before his movie came out. That's where they're addressing underage sex trafficking. And so obviously just a horrible thing. Operation Underground Railroad is doing a phenomenal job of addressing that, and every penny of the signature fee goes directly to that organization.
Well, Chris, I'm going to change up the way we sign off today because it's fun. You've already been on the show multiple times and answered my usual questions. So I'm going to say something, and then you repeat the question back to me and you answer it. The most overrated longevity intervention is?
The most overrated longevity intervention is cold plunge, right? Like I like it. I think it has positive impacts on dopamine, makes life worth living, which does, after the fact, right? Like I don't like doing the cold showers, but I don't know what the longevity data is on cold plunge.
Okay. My favorite upcoming new supplement ingredient is?
My favorite upcoming new supplement ingredient is probiotics, right? So Akkermansia, we didn't even know existed until fairly recently. And there's probably a lot more that we don't. I think there was even another component I saw. I didn't get a chance to read it, that they're identifying different macrophages, I think, or microphages that exist in the gut biome that they didn't really know were there before. And so there's so much value in your gut biome. I love this stat. When you're born, you're 99% human cells and like 1% bacterial cells, right? So you do have some bacteria. as you are today, and when you die, you're actually 95% cells, bacterial cells, in terms of count, not volume, right? And 5% human cells. So you shift from being a human to really being a big bacteria transportation system.
One thing I'm interested in and researching that will become big among biohackers and health optimizers is
one thing that I'm researching and interested in that will become big among biohackers and researchers is protein. Just because that's where I'm at.
After emceeing the Longevity Summit, one thing I'm going to change in my own routine unrelated to diet is...
Okay, after hosting the Longevity Summit, one thing that I'm going to change in my routine and not diet is, well, so it's somewhat related, but I'll say two. So one is really digging in and doing a food sensitivity test, just so I'm aware, because there may be something that I like and eat every day that, is not good for me. And the other is to do some more genetic testing, because there's genetic testing that can provide insights into what's good for you, what's not good for you. And so I want to have that information. So I think kind of committing to more testing is something that I'm certainly interested in.
Chris, how would you like to land this plane today? Any takeaways?
It's free. Get to the Longevity Summit. It's uncovering the secrets of longevity. Live beyond the norms. The link is in the show notes. And really, that's my purpose. Like, if the more people who go to that, the happier I will be.
Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining me yet again on the podcast. I love talking to you about longevity. We talked for about an hour and 20 minutes. We could have easily gone for 3 hours, 4 hours. There's so much to unpack. I'm looking forward to watching some of those talks and learning from some of these experts and seeing where the future, the quorum of longevity knowledge and where it's going to go.
And Nick, thank you so much for having me. This was awesome. I agree. We could have continued for another hour and a half.
Yeah.
But my fast needs to end soon because I've got a meeting.
Yes, I get it. All right, Chris, take care.
Thank you so much, Nick.
I hope that this has been helpful for you. If you enjoyed it, subscribe and hit the thumbs up. I love knowing who's in the 1% committed to reaching their full potential. Comment 1% below so that I know who you are. For all the resources and links, meet me on my website at mindbodypeak.com. I appreciate you and look forward to connecting with you. As a reminder, the information depicted in this video is for information purposes only. Please consult your primary healthcare professional before making any lifestyle changes.